Hello everyone, a very good evening to all of you. Welcome to Study IQ IAS English, and I hope that all of you are doing really great. But somehow the weather of Delhi NCR is not doing great because I think since 2.5 hours it has been raining continuously, and with lots and lots of difficulty I have been able to reach to the studios somehow. So make it sure that if you have joined the session, so do not forget to continue till the very end, because the session has started a little bit late, but I hope that this is the first and the last time that we are coming late, okay? Because of the weather conditions, obviously. So very good evening everybody, those who are live with me in the session. So good evening everyone. Good evening Aisha, Abhishek, Rishi, and good evening Mantasha, Pragya. Good evening to all of you. And guys, do not forget to share this session with your friends as well, so that they can also watch it live along with all of us. Because in today's lecture we are going to start the combined, in fact we can say that a cumulative approach we are going to take for the ancient history part. In fact, if we observe the trends of last few years, like it has been very difficult, very tricky situation, because usually it is very difficult to assess the trends in the UPSC. However, if we talk about 2020 onwards, okay, 2020 onwards, we have seen the increasing numbers of the questions from ancient and medieval parts of history, okay. So till now everybody was doing just the modern history and was thinking that the history syllabus is over, or only this much is history. But today we will be focusing a little bit on the part which we have often ignored. So first of all, if I'm talking about the topic, so let us understand the relation between geographic development and history. Relation between geographic development and history. Those who have seen the NCERTs, this is the first part that we study in the NCERT. Those who have seen the Tamil Nadu board textbook, this is the first part which we study in the Tamil Nadu board textbook as well. All right, everyone. Pranam Purushottam ji, welcome to the session. So here, if we look at this map beautifully, right? This map is a very beautiful map of our country. It shows the mountainous region, okay, mountains. This part is basically the Indo-Gangetic plains. This is the Indo-Gangetic plains. All right. And this portion is basically the Central Highlands. Okay, this is Central Highlands. We can also call it as the plateau or the plateau, right? So apart from that, there are the coastal regions which are extremely, right, fertile and they provide the best trading routes and ports. So that is basically the coastal part. All right. So before we could start understanding the historical context of these things, I think every serious student must be aware about the geographical feature, because let me tell you that the history of any particular place is determined by the factors of geography of that area. For example, you cannot expect that it would be easier for the human beings to cross the Himalayas and to travel to Tibet or to China, right? Whereas if we look at the northwestern parts, where there are the presence of passes, there is the presence of passes. So these passes provided the clear, right, clear pathway for the travelers to travel across the Indian subcontinent and the northwestern parts. So this is why whosoever came to India or invaded India, good evening Anupur, invaded India, they always chose the path of northwestern passes. Northwestern passes. Similarly, all of us might have heard, right? All of us might have heard about the story of Ashoka attacking the Kaling. How many of you have not heard this story that Ashoka was a great king who had attacked the state called Kaling? If you look at the position, right? If you look at the position of the state, right? State called Kaling here, so you can understand it very well that this part where Ashoka is ruling, okay, and Kaling is located somewhere in this area, and at the same time you can also understand that Ashoka was having a close relation with the Lankan islands. Also, they were trying to pursue their trading practices in the coastal areas, because the coastal areas were flourishing to become the trade centers. As I told you that coastal areas, they provide the good opportunity for the trading purpose, right now. So it was probably essential for Ashoka, look, according to the geography, that if he wanted to reach to the coastal area, so this was essential to capture this particular land. Why? Because this entire area was hilly area, it was all highland, and due to being the highland, this area was surrounded by the dense forest, and that is why it was not very easy to cross that forest. Rather, it was easier to take the coastal route and reach to these areas conveniently, right now. So we can say that geographical features have always decided a major part, or played a major part in deciding the historical developments. Now, if we talk about the relation between the geographical settings and the historical development, so let me tell you one thing. Geographical settings, that means the topography and the relief. What is the topography and the relief? Topography and the relief means the setting of the land, the setting of the particular territory. How is the land, right? How is the height of the land? How is the slope of the land? Are there any mountains, rivers, trenches, right? All these physical features, physiographic features, if we study those physiographic features, then we call it as the topography, and the height is called as the relief. All right, everyone. So this topography and relief, it determines the rainfall, winds and climate. For example, the structure of Himalayas present in the north of India, that decides the monsoon climate of the Indian subcontinent. If Himalaya was not there, there would not have been any monsoon climate in India. Probably the winds coming from the Central Asia, Northern Asia, those cold winds coming from the North Pole, they might have penetrated, they might have entered into the Indian subcontinent, and therefore they would have completely frozen the country with the cold. So this is why we can say the topography and the relief of the particular place, it decides the rainfall, winds and therefore the climate. Similarly, we can take the example, for example, suppose you belong to Tamil Nadu. You belong to Tamil Nadu. If you belong to Tamil Nadu, the entire region of Tamil Nadu is in the tropical zone. Tropical zone means in the warm temperature zone, hot temperature zone. Despite being in that tropical zone, the place called Ooty or Udagmandalam in Tamil Nadu, even Mount Abu in Rajasthan, Pachmadhi in Madhya Pradesh, these are the places which are lying in the tropical or high temperature zones. Despite lying in the high temperature zones, due to the relief, due to the height, these places have a little bit cool temperature. which clearly tells us the importance of the topography and the relief to decide the climate of any particular place. After that, the climate and the rainfall and the winds, they decide the type of the soil, vegetation and wildlife. We are all aware about one thing, that the rainfall, that decides the nature of erosion, right? Nature of erosion and deposition. So basically the formation of soil, what is soil? Soil is basically the fragmented, broken and completely shattered pieces of the rocks, which eventually turn into the fine particles, and they are called soil, right? So when we are considering a particular place, the soil of that particular place is always decided by the nature of climate, the amount of the sunshine the place is receiving, the amount of rainfall the place is receiving. Therefore, the type of soil is different in Rajasthan as compared to Meghalaya. It is different in Jammu Kashmir as compared to Chhattisgarh, right? Why? Because the different places have got the different climates, okay, and that is why different climates means different soil. Different soil means different vegetation, and different vegetation means what? Different wildlife. Now the thing is to understand that how does the different vegetation or how does the different wildlife decides the different pattern of habitat. Now let us understand one thing. Suppose if I tell you that where it will be easier, right? Where it will be easier to live in a cave, in the Gangetic Plains or in the Deccan Plateau? Tell me guys, yes. Tell me the answer, that where are you supposed to find the caves, rock cut caves, in the Gangetic Plains or in the Deccan area? Tell me. So I hope that all of you would agree to this point, that the Deccan Plains are more likely to have the rock cut caves or simply the caves. Why? Because of the presence of the big boulders, rocks, stone pieces, mountains, etc. Because the Gangetic Plains, they are supposed to have the soil which is fertile, plain, and that is why the forest will be much more dense forest, isn't it? And when there is a dense forest, it is difficult for anybody to live in that dense forest, because the earliest human beings, they were not having the enough resources to cut down those forest areas. Now I hope you will get the answer. If suppose anybody has the question in the mind that why do we find the earliest human settlements in India in the hilly areas, in the foothills of the Himalayas, in the Deccan region, Vindhya region, Satpura region, Nilgiri region? Why all these mountainous regions, why do these areas have the earliest settlement? It is because the plains had extremely dense vegetation which was not suitable for the habitat of the earliest human beings. Okay, everybody? I hope you got the clear understanding of this. So when the habitat is determined, the habitat also decides the development extent and the socio-cultural and economic life. How does it happen? For example, suppose I am living in the metro city, then my level of living or standard of living will be different from the person who is living in a remote place. If the person is living in the village area, he will be getting the healthier food as compared to, or much cleaner food or water as compared to the person who is living in the urban areas, isn't it? So definitely the development of the socio-cultural and economic life, that depends upon the pattern of the habitat. And let me tell you that these developments, these changes, these interactions, the interaction between the two different factors in the time space, that is called history if it is recorded. If it is recorded. For example, I am here and this building is here. So whatever interaction took place between me and this building, for example, I used to work at this building, I have constructed this building, or this building used to be my house, whatever interaction, any type of interaction, the record of this interaction is called history. So history will say that the Abhishek used to live in that particular house, or Abhishek used to work at that particular office. This is the history, right? Now, similarly, the early human beings also used to live at a particular place, used to do a particular activity, right? Used to use the different resources, draw the pictures. Got it? So these factors of change, right? These activities are determined by several factors of changes. What is the meaning of the factor of changes? For example, one factor of change, right? One factor of change, that is the time. Another factor of change, that may be any important innovation or any important discovery. For example, iron. Iron is a very, very important factor of change. How is the iron very important factor of change? Because iron, it entirely changed the method in which the people were living before discovery of iron and after discovery of iron. For example, the iron axis. Axe means, what is the axe? You all must have seen this type of weapon. Right now. So this is called an axe. So this weapon, it was suppose made up of the iron. Okay, iron. So the iron axis, they completely changed the pattern of expansion of the human population. The people started burning the forest and they started cutting the forest areas. Similarly, if you have seen, you can also add, suppose this is a tool, okay, this is a tool. Got it, everyone? Now, you all might have seen this tool, right? What is this tool called as? This tool is called as a plow. It is called as a plow. Suppose, can you not say that the agriculture can be categorized into two different time periods? One when before the discovery of plow, and the second after the discovery of plow. Isn't it? So we can categorize the agriculture into two different aspects. So anything which happens in the history, definitely there are certain factors which completely act as the divider of the history. For example, the British advent in India, the British or the European advent in India, that completely divided the Indian history in before the European adventure and after the European adventure, right? Arrival of Vasco da Gama, isn't it? So there are different types of the factors of change, which completely decide the direction of the history. And not just that, these factors of change decide the direction of the history, which means they completely affect the socio-economic and cultural life, and the study of these factors and the changes occurring due to those factors, that is called as history. Right, everybody? So We can have the examples of the relationship between the geographical features and the historical developments, like the presence of Himalayas. It has completely determined the climate of the Indian subcontinent, and at the same time this climate has been a big factor in deciding the historical developments in India. Similarly, the presence of the old fold mountains and the old plateaus. Now these mountains and these plateaus in the central India, in the Deccan region, they have completely affected the historical development in that area. Because of these old mountains, old plateaus, the early human beings got the stone, due to which they were able to develop the stone tools. These old areas provided the earliest settlement sites for the early human beings, due to which their entire community started to develop, and we find the development of the human settlements, earliest human settlements in the Vindhya region, Satpura region, etc., etc. Right now, telegram name Bhaskar Mandal, telegram name, in fact I have just told in the beginning itself. At the end also I will be telling you telegram link, don't worry. Right, then we have got the Indo-Gangetic fertile plains. So these fertile plains have also played a major role. Suppose if these plains were not fertile, can you expect, can you imagine the development of the Magad as an empire? Can you imagine the growth story of the second phase of urbanization? Can you consider the possibility of the 16 Mahajanpadas? Definitely there is no possibility if these areas were not fertile in the nature. Right? And one most important thing, the very, very, very important thing, end of the Pleistocene and the start of the Holocene. What is the meaning of this Pleistocene, Holocene, etc.? If we do not go into the depth of these terminologies, but just we need to understand that if we consider this time period as present time period, which is the time period P, and this is the point number O, this is point O, which is the beginning, right, beginning period. So we can categorize the complete time duration of the life of the earth into different time zones or different time periods. Okay, these time periods are called as the geological time scale. Geological time scale. All right, everybody. So this geological time scale, the very, very last time scale, if we are talking about the very last time scale, so here we have the Pleistocene and Holocene. Pleistocene and Holocene. UPSC had asked a question. Related to the Meghalayan age. Why had they asked a question related to the Meghalayan age? Because this Meghalayan age was in the news, because this signifies the time period of the 4200 years ago, right? And this indicates the relatively dry season or dry climate. Relatively dry climate. Okay. So the relatively drier climate is determined by the Meghalayan age. But before that, when was the exact time that the temperature of the earth that started increasing, and till today we are seeing the increase in the temperature? If you study history and geography properly, you will get the idea that currently earth is under the increasing phase, like growing phase of the temperature. That is why we are facing the increasing temperature. Yes, it is obviously correct that the human interventions have resulted into the much faster rate of temperature growth. Okay, everybody. So that is very important to understand. So Pleistocene was basically called as the Ice Age, and the end of the Ice Age resulted into the developments of the grasslands, development of the grasslands. Why so? Because we all are aware that when the ice is melting from any particular place, what is the first thing that will grow? Obviously, grasses will grow. Okay, grasses will grow. And after the growing of the grasses, what will happen? The population of the herbivores that would automatically increase, resulting into the development of successive species, and therefore the pattern of living, the pattern of existence of the human beings, that will also change. The warm climate conditions will support agricultural developments. Getting the point here, everyone? Warm climatic changes, they would support the agricultural developments, and due to the agricultural developments, what will happen? The human life that would start converting into a sustainable or a sustainable manner, and that sustainability will provide the stability to the human settlements. This stability will result into what? This stability will result into the growth of society. Society will be having a culture, and culture with the civilizational development, that will create the phase of cultural civilization. So I hope that you all got a clear idea that how does the geographical setting, it decides the or determines the historical developments. We understood from the very beginning up to the development of society, culture and civilization. Is anybody having any questions? Yes, everyone? Anybody is having any questions or queries? Please do ask it. All right. Okay, so if you are having question, kindly mention in the chat box. Then let us understand the earliest human evolution in India. So the history can be divided into three categories on the basis of the types of evidences obtained. So history is basically a historical time period that could be divided into three distinct phases. Number one, the prehistoric time. Number two, proto-historic time. And number three, the historic time. Okay. How do we decide the prehistory, proto-history, right? Prehistory, proto-history or historical time period, right? So basically, what is the meaning of prehistory? What is the meaning of prehistory? Bhaskar, kindly pay attention and you will understand it very, very clearly, because I have not defined the timeline yet. At the end of the session, I also have provided the timeline, right? And you will understand everything completely clearly from that place. Got it, everyone? So, what is the prehistory? Prehistory is when there is no written or literary evidence, only the archaeological evidences are found. Only archaeological evidences are found. Got it? So, Bhaskar, I am just telling you one thing, that since the beginning of the time period, which is called the geological cycle, obviously the age of the earth, okay, since the beginning of that particular time, there have been the constant changes which are occurring, and around 11,000 years ago, there was a major change, that is the end of the ice age. The ice age was called Pleistocene. The end of the ice age resulted into the warm temperatures, and the warm temperatures supported the crop production, plant growth, and due to which the human beings, they started living a sustainable source, right, sustainable way of life, resulting into the formation of the societies, cultures and all. I hope you got it, Bhaskar. Now, what is prehistory? When we have no written sources, we have only archaeological sources. The meaning of archaeological sources means what? Archaeological source, that means we have the materials, we have the tools, we have the objects, right, products, something which is tangible, we have that. Okay, we have that. Pottery, cloths, okay, utensils, food grains, right, bones, teeth, hair, body, dead body, burials, all these are called as the archaeological evidences. Got it, everybody? What is the proto-history? Right. So if we talk about the prehistory, we don't have any settled or civilized life. We don't have any settled or civilized life. But if we talk about the proto-history, we have the settled and civilized life, evidences of the settled and civilized life. All right, everyone? Okay? No, it's okay, Bhaskar, it's okay. So here, in the proto-history, we have the literary as well as the archaeological sources. That means there are the availability of written sources, right? Written sources as well as the archaeological or the material sources. But we don't have the understanding of the written sources. We are unable to read what is written there. We are unable to read what is written there. Right, everyone? Yes, Anjali, not mug up, but completely understanding the book is very, very essential. Now, if we talk about the use of metal or use of the stones or the animal husbandry, all these things are present. All these things are present, but these things, they indicate that this phase of history was developed, but we are unable to understand the development because of inability, right? Because of our inability to understand the literary sources. Now, what is history? The history is basically the presence of both archaeological and literary evidences. Not just the archaeological and literary evidences. There are also the cross verifying resources. For example, the numismatics is there. Okay, numismatics is there. What is the meaning of this numismatics? Numismatics means the study of the coins. The study of the coins. So we have the evidences of the coins. Okay. Then apart from that, the travelogues are there. Okay. Travelogues are there. What is the meaning of travelogue? The travelogues basically means what? Travelogues means the records of travelers. Records of travelers. Okay. Apart from that, what else do we have? We have the edicts, right? Edicts and inscriptions. Edicts and inscriptions. Okay. So here, what is the edicts and inscription? Basically, the kings or the queens or the people in that time period, they used to inscribe the writings on the wall of the houses, pillars, rocks and other stone or metallic surfaces. Stones or metallic surfaces. So such type of special writings which are related to the descriptions of the king or activities of the king, related to any announcement or something on the stone, rocks, pillars, right, wooden plaques or the copper or other metallic plaques. So all these things are called as they are called as edicts and inscriptions. Got it, everyone? Now, the most important part. This topic is directly given in the significance, right, basically in the R.S. Sharma, that what is the significance of the ancient Indian history? That means why do we study the ancient Indian history? Guys, this topic may not be very much useful for the examination, but this topic is extremely useful for developing the understanding of your subject. In the mains examination, there was a question from the culture part. What was the question? That discuss the elementary similarities and differences. Guys, this is not the exact language of the question, but the meaning of the question, that was exactly same. It was probably in 2018 or 2019. I'm not very sure about it. But discuss the elementary similarities and differences, right? Comparison of the prehistoric paintings, okay, prehistoric paintings with modern paintings. With modern paintings. Okay, so now you have to get a deep understanding of the context of the paintings, that why do the human beings do the painting? Why do they do the painting, or why do they paint? So this is basically going to be clear once we get the idea of the cultural development. So history tells us about the cultural development, right? It tells us about the early inhabitants and their life, that how did they live. Suppose if we talk about the Bhimbetka, we get to see that at Bhimbetka there are the paintings of the birds, birds which are perching, birds perching on the ground, right? So that means probably there was the time when already the grains were already in the use. Or we see the paintings where a few people are dancing collectively, dancing together. So this collective dance also indicates what? It indicates that probably the people had started living together. The people had started celebrating the occasions together. That means the beginning of the social life had already started. So that is how we get to see the different aspects of the ancient history, and we have a clear understanding, clear idea about the people, the culture, their society, their language, their script, all right, all these things. For example, you can have a look on this particular picture. This indicates a person sitting in the yogic posture, and let me tell you that it is different picture. It is not the yogic posture of Lord Shiva or Pashupati. It's not that. It is a different picture. It is a different picture. Here you have got some of the symbols. Okay, probably a fish, or maybe a sign of U, something like that. Here is a bull. Okay, here is a bull. So suppose if there are lots and lots of such stone plaques, such stone seals, and there we have the images of the bull, what does it indicate? It indicates that probably the bull was considered a sacred animal. Probably it was considered a sacred animal. And not just that, if we look at this particular animal, it looks very, very special animal. It does not look like any ordinary animal. Many historians have called that this was probably a unicorn. However, it appears that probably this might be a combination of two or different animals, because Harappans, after observing a lot of Harappan seals, we have reached to the conclusion, we have understood about their culture, about their way of living, and we have concluded that probably they were making the seals by combining the two different animals and their features, right? Similarly, we have got several examples in which the settlements from the Neolithic and other time period, the settlements have the presence of graveyards with the objects inside a pitcher or inside a pot. So inside a pot, if there are objects related to the life of a person, which means what can we conclude? By this knowledge, what can we conclude about the culture of that people? We can conclude that such people, they used to believe in the posthumous life, or believe in the concept of life after the death, or probably they were not aware about anything called as death, anything that can be believed. For example, this picture shows you the different symbols, right? Different symbols, and these symbols actually, they are connected with the Egyptian civilization. And let me tell you that there used to be a pattern in the symbols of which are used here, and this pattern has been decoded. It has been decoded. From these patterns only we are able to understand the life and the details of the history of the Egyptian civilization. Similarly, the history that proves the unity in diversity of India. Unity in diversity of India is proven by history, right? For example, India has been constituted by several ethnic and cultural groups like pre-Aryans, Indo-Aryans, Greeks, Scythians, Huns, Turks. India has been the home to several adventing or incoming tribes. And till today, there are lots and lots of people who are coming into India. Some of the Indians are going out as well. So basically, our culture has become a synthesized culture, a pluralistic culture, right? So whenever you get a question related to the Indian culture, mind it that you have to consider that the examiner wants to listen that India is a pluralistic culture. What is the meaning of pluralistic culture? Once again, everybody, pluralistic culture means that there are multiple cultural features present in the land of India, which are obviously not the property of any specific culture, any specific group of people. Okay. Several ancient cultures have shaped the Indian languages, phonetics, lexicons like Indo-Aryan, Tamil and Munda cultures. For example, if you understand that Vedic texts, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, etc., they are in the Sanskrit, that's very good. But if you will learn history, then you will realize that the Vedas also contain several terminologies which belong to the Munda group of languages. That is Austroasiatic, right? Austroasiatic group of languages. Okay. So the Austroasiatic group of languages, how are they present in the Vedas? Which means that probably the Vedic people, they might be having some connection with the Mundari group of people, some connection with the Dravidian group of people, right? So such type of things, they lead to the conclusion that unlike we think that the Vedic culture is completely secluded and the other parts of the country where the tribal culture is flourishing, that is completely different. It is not like that. Our culture is a composite culture. It is a composite culture. All right. The cultural growth and development has been contributed by different groups, different ethnicities and varieties of people in India. Interrelated religious philosophies, political and territorial formations, and the strive to expand across the subcontinent. In the entire ancient and medieval history, you will find the efforts of different rulers to capture the entire subcontinent, which clearly indicates that all the people, even in the ancient history, the kings and the different dynasties, they were aware that India is a single geographical, political, cultural unit. If not political, then definitely geographical and cultural unit is there, right? Not just that, if you observe that more or less, whichever ruler in the ancient history or the medieval history, more or less whichever ruler tried to expand their kingdom, they were somehow trying to achieve the natural geographical boundaries which are present in the northeast, the Himalayan Assam region, Assam Himalayas. In the northwest, the Kabul Valley, Hindu Kush region, Suleiman Kirthar region. In the southern area, the Nilgiris, right? So these natural boundaries, they were actually the target of almost every king or the emperor who was trying to expand the kingdom. So that clearly tells us that India, despite having the diverse dynastical politics, despite having the diverse political history, the factor of unity is the singular geographical identity that India had. Okay. In fact, let me tell you that even the literary text like the Vishnu Puran, right, the Vishnu Puran describes that the land of Bharatvarsh is that, right, is that in the north of which lies Himalayas and the south of which lies the great ocean, right? So this is how they used to tell about the Indian subcontinent. They were aware that this place is a common place. This entire stretch of the land is a common stretch of the land and contains the mountains and the oceans. Now, concepts like the Varna and the caste, the languages like Prakrit, Sanskrit, and epics, right? And epics like Mahabharata, Ramayana. Guys, there are a lot of things which share the common existence in Indian subcontinent. I'm not going to tell you about just negative things like caste or the language, the linguistic differences. But some of the positive things are also there. If you will study the ancient history and you will understand the culture of the country, you will realize that the most ancient dance practices, the folk stories, the sculpture art, the statue construction, all these things, what do they have in common? They have the common themes related to the Ramayana, related to the Mahabharatas, related to the Puranas. Similar type of common themes have been found. For example, the Varaha incarnation of Lord Vishnu, it is represented as far as in the Karnataka, in the Madhya Pradesh, in the Assam, as well as in the Rajasthan region. Right? Not just that. Varah Mool, right? Varah Mool is the place in Jammu Kashmir, which is currently called as the Baramulla, right? Baramulla. That was the place of Varah Mool, which means the Varah temple was existing even in Jammu and Kashmir, and at the same time in the Pallava kingdom of Tamil Nadu region, their capital was Kanchi in Tamil Nadu. The Pallavas had constructed a mandap called as Varah Mandap. What is mandap? A rock cut, you can say, enclave or a temple like structure. So this cultural feature is telling you, right, completely and in a very clear way that the different places, they were somehow in some point of time connected with the common cultural identity, which indicates the unity in diversity of India. All right, everyone, unity in the diversity of India. Got it, everybody? Now, so these are the maps which tell you the linguistic differences or the linguistic distribution of the country. You can see here, these are the Dravidian group of languages. But the ironical situation is that in the Sri Lankan islands, Dravidian languages are present in the northern area, in the southern part of Sri Lanka, which is very, very far away from the Indo-Aryan groups. There is the presence of Singhali language, which belongs to the Indo-Aryan group. What does it indicate? It indicates that the people speaking the Indo-Aryan languages, probably they traveled and they reached to the Sri Lanka, and then they settled in the Sri Lankan island, and later on, due to the continuous connection with the Tamil region in the northern Sri Lanka, we have the dominance of the Dravidian linguistic speakers, but the rest of the Sri Lankan island that was having the Sinhalese speakers, which is a language of the Indo-Aryan group of languages. Okay. Similarly, you can have this, right? You can have this Austroasiatic languages, all right, which means the Austroasiatic languages are connected with the Southeast Asian languages, Southeast Asia, right now. So we can have a clear understanding that the Indian subcontinent contains the linguistic varieties as well as the cultural diversity. Despite it has the common connections to establish it as a nation. Now, this is about the description of the languages. Once the class is over, you can see this particular thing in the recording, that how is this Indo-Aryan language species that is going to be divided into the different groups, like in the Western Hindi, Eastern Hindi, Nepali, then here in the eastern part, the Bengali, Assamese, Bihari, Odia, right? So probably the entire group of languages in the northern India, eastern India, western India, all of them belong to the Indo-Aryan language family. Got it? Hello, Sonu. Now, so what is the relevance of our past to our present? I think we have understood it very clearly, that the difference between the clamor of the ancient glory and the efforts behind its restoration. So suppose nowadays people are trying to push our country towards the ancient systems. So we have to understand the difference, that we do not have to bring the ancient practices back in our history, but we have to conserve the identities. We have to conserve the identities, conserve the features of our culture. For example, Yajna. It does not mean that Yajna was present in our ancient history so that we should start doing Yajna every day. No. But if Yajna was present in our history, then we must preserve that practice. We must understand the significance of that practice. This is more important for the people of today. Instead of simply copying the practices or the rituals of the ancient times, we need to understand the logic behind that, the purpose behind that, and we need to preserve that valuable cultural heritage. I hope you are getting the point here, everybody. Are you getting the point? Now, to analyze the pros and cons of our past without a bias on the socio-economic and cultural fronts. So here we have that we need to understand the past of our country without having any bias, that this was done only by Hindus, or the entire country belonged only to the Buddhist or only to the Jains. Whenever we come across any news that this particular place was excavated, the people start claiming that this was originally a Buddhist place, this was originally a Hindu place, this was originally a something other's place. These things are useless. These are useless things. What is more essential, that we need to understand that what was that thing which we have found out, what was the common cultural feature of that particular excavation. This is going to help us in understanding the history instead of fighting over that. Now, similarly, if we talk about the socio-economic and cultural fronts, there are many practices which were existing in the past of our country. For example, sati system. For example, the child marriage. We have come over that practice. We have completely, left those practices. So it does not mean that in order to replicate the past practices of our country, we start doing those mistakes once again. So history tells us that how to evolve, how to develop further in our culture, in our growth. To understand the surviving cultural elements and their positive as well as the negative consequences for a progressive society. What is the meaning of that? Some of the cultural practices, they are still existing in our country. For example, the gender discrimination. Gender discrimination. This is a cultural practice which belongs to the medieval time period. Medieval time period. Or you can say the early medieval to the proper medieval. So when I am saying medieval time period or ancient time period, that means there is definitely some classification which is done, and we have continued that practice even today. Similarly, we have continued the practices like caste system. That is also going to create a lot of trouble in the modern time period. Okay. So the socio-cultural discrimination which are related to socio-cultural discriminations which are related to the historical background, they must be abolished if we have the complete understanding of the historical development of those features. Got it? To understand our evolution as a society and the root cause of the present obstacles, guys, the biggest benefit of history, the biggest relevance of the history at present, that is to understand the root cause of any problem. For example, suppose we talk about the Kashmir problem, we talk about the Kashmir issue, or we talk about the relations between India and Nepal. Then we must go into the historical context in order to get the better understanding of these issues, right? Similarly, if we want to resolve the problems such as the communalism, such as the polarization between Hindus and Muslims, then we must need to go into the details of these problems. Got it, everyone? So you can see the Varna system, and similarly you can see the caste system. In Varna system, only Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. In the caste system, you can have the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishya, and there are a lot of people in the Shudras, right? Peasants, servants, common people, and the group of people called as untouchables, outcast people who are not considered the part of the four Varna system. So caste system has a lot of differences with the Varna system. All these things we will be covering up in the Vedic culture wala chapter, and you can see this picture which indicates the agony of the caste system. Here the person is giving the payment without touching, just from the above. This indicates that even today we are having this cultural practice in existence that is creating a trouble in the society. Got it, everyone? Now this is the timeline of the history. You can have a screenshot of this timeline so that you can understand it very well. And it is actually showing a basic idea from minus 4000. So minus 4000 means this is zero. This is zero, okay? The birth of Christ. The birth of Christ. Okay. The birth of Christ. So whenever we are going on the left side from the birth of Christ, we call it as BCE, before Common Era. Whenever we are going to the right side of the birth of Christ, we are calling it as the Common Era or CE. This is also called as BC, that is before Christ, and this is also called as AD, that is in the reign of Christ, in the rule of Christ. Okay, so this is how we have to be very, very much careful now. So this is actually giving a complete overview beginning from the Stone Age, then Bronze Age, then Iron Age, then Classical Age, Medieval Age and Modern Age. Okay, everyone. So this is the complete timeline of the Indian historical ages. Indian historical ages. Got it, everyone? So here you can have the different dynasties, and we can see that most of the dynasties, they started developing in the Iron Age. In the Iron Age. And after that, continuous developments, they are taking place. Got it, everybody? Why was the caste system started? Because of the different practices, different you can say professions which were in the existence. When we will study about the Gupta age, then I will explain it in a very much detailed manner, that why was the caste system formulated. Okay, everyone? So you can join the Telegram group by using this particular ID, that is @Abhishek Singh Sir PO. Okay, so that is the Telegram group that you can join. So thank you so much, everybody. Take care, bye bye, and have a great day ahead. Let's meet tomorrow. Till then, Jai Hind and thank you.